I am thrilled that today's guests are a repeat guest. Adam Kinzinger, of course, the former congressman from Illinois, one of the great heroes in our country, one of the few, we could count them on one hand, Republicans who did not get on the Donald Trump train, went completely in the opposite direction, and did that fearlessly. He's a senior political commentator at CNN and a lieutenant colonel in the Air National Guard. Welcome, sir.
Hey, thanks. You say that so nicely. It's like I still say it just blows me away that others didn't do the right thing, because it's like not that hard. This guy's crazy. So it's like, I mean, come on.
It is. So what, in the most simplistic term, why is that? Because I don't know how these people as men, and I don't mean to sound sexist, look at their wives and their children and their parents and their neighbors in this subservient, submissive, kowtowing, cowardly way. Please try and explain it to me just as a human.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, here's the other thing. Let me add to that. I don't see how these guys as men can believe that Donald Trump represents anything but like the weakest person that could exist. I mean, he's loud. Yeah, he's brash. He says things that nobody else used to say. Great, right? Maybe that's somehow some weird definition of being masculine, but he doesn't defend the defenseless. He punches down. He doesn't punch up. He doesn't go after like Vladimir Putin. He goes after, some guy or two ladies that happen to be counting votes in Georgia. And so like everything about him is truly not masculine, because I think of masculinity as like defending people, defending innocence, defending, people that are true victims. And I just think what it is after time, there obviously, I think the left went very far at some point on like talking about toxic masculinity and kind of putting men aside. And I think this is a counter reaction to it. And again, they've been convinced that loudness and anger and meanness is masculine, and it's not.
Speaking of the far left, if there was a third party that stood in the middle, they would get 65% of this country. That's where, I mean, I'm really, most of my beliefs are traditional Republican beliefs. I happen to be a Democrat. I'll vote for the right candidate, whichever party is. But neither party really is representing such a huge swath of who we are as a country.
Yeah, I mean, look, and this is the difficulty in like, what the two parties have set up is they've made it almost impossible for like a new party to come about. Let me give you a quick example. So, I was pretty much determined even before the January 6th stuff not to run again, because, I did 12 years in Congress and all that. But I did take a cursory look at what would it take to run as an independent in Illinois. And look, so to run as a Republican in Illinois, I needed like 800 petition signatures, usually double that just to be safe. If I would have run as an independent, it's something like 5,000 or 8,000 signatures I would have needed. And by the way, none of those signatures could have ever voted in a primary. So you think about like how tough is that to ever run as an independent or to create a third party? But that's the issue. I think and quite honestly, if the 65% of people keep feeling unrepresented, election after election, I think they will force a third party, a centrist party. And honestly, like that would drag both these parties back to the middle, because you'd have to create coalition government. I'd love to see it. It's not on the near horizon, but I'd love to see it in the future at some point.
You and me both. I read something recently. It was so great. Last week, a Twitter or X, I always say Twitter, asked you, and it said this: why do you hate Trump so much when he's so patriotic? I thought you were a patriot. Please help me understand sincerely. And I loved your response. You said, because Donald Trump, who faked a medical condition and abandoned his country when it needed him most, is a disgrace, because I want my son to learn the name Trump alongside Judas and Benedict Arnold as people who sold out their nation and the opposite of real men. That's why. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's just, I think about this and I'm like, okay, I truly believe if we could like future quantum leap, 10 years forward, and we'd ask people like, did you ever support Donald Trump? I mean, I truly believe that there's not going to be a single person alive that would ever admit to supporting Trump, because I think even if he gets elected president, like he's not going to come out of the presidency more popular. He's going to continue to slide into this weird kind of thing he's become. But I don't want my kid learning that is politics is normal. It angers me when they talk about, Tim Walz skipping out on service when the guy was perfectly eligible to retire, and Donald Trump did everything he could to avoid, including faking a medical condition. Look, a lot of people avoided the draft, fine. But those people that avoided the draft are not attacking people that have 24 years of service or calling military members that died suckers and losers, or saying about John McCain that he prefers people that weren't captured. I mean, my goodness. And that's, I want my son to hear about him in the same light that he hears about Judas, that he hears about Benedict Arnold, and all these bad people in history that everybody knows their names, but not for good reasons.
You, as a veteran, a pilot, flew Afghanistan, other tours, you wrote and how offended you were that J.D. Vance started the Swift boat thing and Trump started it, and that they should just say thank you and move on.
That's it. I mean, here's the other, there's two big issues here. Number one, this forces veterans against each other, which is the stupidest thing. Because you end up, this happens at war where you have like some people like, oh, I kicked down doors and you flew airplanes or you didn't deploy, and that whole rank thing is stupid. But on top of that, if here's a question, if you ever served in the military, who would want to run for office now? Like who? Because if you go out there and say, I served in the military, and at any point in your history, you maybe exaggerated a story, or you may have accidentally incorrectly said what you did, or you may have said that you carried a weapon to war when you meant to say a weapon of war.
Right.
And now all of a sudden you're being attacked by people that never served a day in their life. That's another big thing. And lastly, I'll say this. I know 100 people, not 100, but I know a lot of people that actually were eligible to retire from the military that were alerted that they were going to deploy and are like, nope, I'm done. I've deployed enough. I'm getting out. I'm eligible to retire. Perfectly legal. And Tim Walz did not know they were deploying. And I mean, look, if the military, if he truly left the military in a bad position, they could have stop-lossed him, refused to let him retire, but they had somebody that came and replaced him. That person's out attacking Tim Walz because he has a personal beef with him. It's crazy.
You, as one of the, I call you affectionately renegade Republicans, one of the 10 who voted to impeach, did other guys kind of come up to you and go, hey man, I wish I could, like, I really respect you and I can't, I got bills to pay, or whatever it is. Did you get a lot of positive whispers behind the scenes?
Oh yes. And it tapered as, the hearing started going, because I think that, I would never reveal a private conversation, but
right.
I think they started to get concerned that I would, so people would say less. But I mean, especially at the beginning, I had so many people, Donny, that would come up to me and say, boy, I really wish I could vote to impeach, but my district would never reelect me. And I'm like, look, my district is
it's a primary,
it's as Republican as any of y'all's.
Yeah.
It's like, but this is the right thing to do. And I mean, it was countless. I could name, if I was into that, I could name 30 people right off the bat, half of which would just blow people away. They came up and said, thanks for doing it. But then, I guess that title is more important to them.
Can you see, I've always said the only thing that's going to get the Republicans back to normalcy is losing. Can you see if Trump loses? And right now, it looks like there's a better than 50-50 chance, I'd say, and the world is going to change 7 more times. But do you think one more loss and the Republicans kind of go, you know what? This MAGA thing is a lose, because basically since 2017, they've lost every election. And at some point, they're going to beat their heads against the wall and go, you know what? Let's make a little bit of a left turn here.
Yeah, so let me give you the hopeful case. And I'm not convinced this will be the case, but the hopeful scenario would be Donald Trump doesn't just lose in a close race. He loses pretty definitively, big for nowadays. And the GOP goes, you know what? Yes, we need to start winning. Truly, Donald Trump's never won a single election, if we're being honest. I mean, he won the Electoral College in 2016, but he lost the popular vote.
Yeah.
And that the leaders then say, okay, it's time to lead this party into a different future. Now, why didn't this happen after January 6th, right? I actually can tell you there was about a 3-week period after January 6th where we were all sitting around in the conference, which is like when all the Republicans get together, all the Republican members. And it was just kind of silence because nobody knew where this was going to go. Like they didn't know what to do. And it was when Kevin McCarthy went to Mar-a-Lago that all of a sudden Trump was resurrected, because he was politically dead until that point. Now, the reason Kevin went to Mar-a-Lago, he had only one goal in his life. He wanted to become speaker. And he realized that he couldn't, in the next year and a half, destroy MAGA and still win the speakership. So we decided to embrace them. Now, the good scenario says if Trump loses in this race, there's not going to be like somebody has to become speaker, so they're just going to embrace the girl that brought him to the dance. Instead, maybe they can sit around and say, okay, now it is time to take it on. They won't do it openly, but maybe try to steer the party in a different direction. The more, maybe slightly more likely scenario is that Donald Trump still is like the grandfather of the party. He claims the election was stolen again. People rally behind him. And somebody, I don't think it's going to be J.D. Vance, but like Vivek Ramaswamy or somebody like that takes the mantle of Trumpism and goes with it. I'm not sure the Republican Party is yet going to be willing to look in the mirror and say they did this to themselves versus the deep state doing it to them. They will. In 5 or 10 years, there's going to be a wake up. I hope it's sooner, but it may take a while to get there.
There is this incredible enthusiasm, joy, passion that's going behind Kamala right now. And I think it's that people feel they have someplace to go. And it's reminding me of, I worked on the Bill Clinton campaign in 92 and Barack Obama. There was this thing happening that when Joe Biden won in 2020, it wasn't that. And it was, and I think Trump feels that. Long way around of saying, I could see Trump at the Democratic convention next week, just getting rid of Vance and putting in Nikki Haley. He's going to be so desperate. He's the most transactional guy. Nobody's talking about that. To me, I see that as a real possibility.
I do too. Now, I'll caveat that with saying I don't know what the different states' rules are in terms of ballots.
I've looked it up. He really has until September 1st. Originally, Ohio had a deadline of August 9th, but they've pushed that back. So he's got another 2 weeks.
And he could just literally wave a wand and it's done, and from his perspective, he could say, look, the Democrats just replaced the guy running on the ticket. Yeah. So I can do this too. I think it's, I would say less than 50%, but not,
but a real possibility.
Zero, but a real possibility because he's raging. I mean, I just actually, before I got on with you, I saw some tweet where Vance is speaking at a rally where there's like 30 people at it right now. Right. And that can't make Trump happy. He's pretty obsessed with his crowds,
What's really stunning also is I was on Morning Joe this morning and they put up just 10 things he said in the last week. I mean, ranging from that Kamala Harris's crowds were AI to Joe Biden's going to show up at the convention and we're cool. Really, not just his normal lies, not just his normal stuff, but really delusional stuff where people don't talk. It was so easy for people to talk about Biden, that he didn't have his faculties, that he was old, that he lost his fastball and all that. And there doesn't seem to be the same scrutiny on what clearly is a guy who is not there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, look, the difference between Biden and Trump, I mean, Biden, when he had slow moments, he didn't say anything insane, right? He just slowed down. Trump is really good at when his brain breaks, and you see this in the rallies, he trails off into insanity. So if he misspeaks a word, instead of admitting he misspoke the word and going back and correcting it, whatever he said, he allows that to go off into another rabbit trail, because then it looks like he meant to do that in the first place. And it's just an inherent advantage Trump has, which is America is just used to him being crazy, and it's just baked into the cake now. But I will say that was the case, and I think it still is generally the case. But he really seems to be like this. I don't know. Let's compassionately, I'll say this. Maybe the assassination attempt had a real effect on him. Maybe that's why he's not traveling and it's unrecognized PTSD. But he also is really melting down because of this energy you're talking about with Kamala. And let me say something interesting about that. I think had Kamala been the candidate for a year, she wouldn't have this energy.
No way.
There'd be some,
and she would be running as an incumbent, and she would not have kind of a little bit of the freedom to separate herself from it.
Yep, absolutely. And you think about it, people were dreading this election. It's it's Biden against Trump again. Anybody new comes in and Kamala is the one. All this enthusiasm is thank Jesus we don't have to deal with what we thought we'd have to deal with again. So look, I think, let's be realistic. Some of that like enthusiasm will fade in the next 3 months, but I'm not convinced that it's going to go away. I think she's going to continue to have generate this kind of crowd.
She's really surprised me. I was one of the ones, and a lot of people disagree with me, wanted some form of an open convention. I thought it would be a great spectacle, let her earn it, not that she would certainly be the front runner, and instead it was just handed to her. And that seems to have been the move. I mean, she looks confident and in charge and loose and, just feeling very presidential, frankly.
Yeah, I was actually with you because I'm like, even if you do like a mini primary and try to have a vote before the convention or at the convention, I was believing that would be, like you said, it's an opportunity for her to earn it. People get to see the good candidates that Democrats have. But you're right. I mean, literally everything went perfectly. She was able to sew up the nomination very quickly. I think there's some bitterness with Biden still, but he didn't show that bitterness. The party really quickly rallied behind her. She had the money that Joe Biden had, by definition, because she was on the ticket.
Sure.
But she raised like $200 million in 48 hours, which is insane. And this is working out perfectly for her. And on top of that, they got the convention coming. Yeah, there might be disruptions. You may have some Gaza stuff, but it's probably not going to be as bad as it was going to be. And she'll get a little bump out of this convention.
She certainly will. Trump's biggest problem, he has so many problems, but he does not know how to run against a woman of color. You see it, you feel it. I mean, you saw him at the Black Journalists Conference. You couldn't believe it. You watch it and your jaw drops. And his I don't want to say disdain, his uncomfortableness with women and people of color shows. It's just, and I'm convinced there's going to be a horrific moment, might happen during the debate, that something really racist comes out of his mouth, more racist than we've ever seen. He's already said racist, that he is really struggling.
He can't help himself. I mean, look, I saw this when I would meet with him in the Oval Office, just like, I don't even know how to put it to words, but there's this kind of guttural sense about him. He kind of feels, in not an empathetic way, but he feels like in a personal way, people's traits. So here's a quick example is he was talking to us about it. We were trying to get him to like stay in Afghanistan and stay in Syria. It was me and some of the Hawks. And he was talking about and he actually talked about this recently, like the injured people in Afghanistan, the injured soldiers. But he's like, they're like missing arms and disfigured faces. But the way he's describing it, you can sense that he's feeling some almost disgust for the disfigurement of these soldiers. He publicly
said to Kelly, they had I think he was a veteran and I think he was an amputee. And he said to him, I don't want guys like that on stage anymore. I mean, it's the most vile human trait you could possibly have.
It really is. It's like eugenics, right? It's this. Yeah. And by the way, Don is the kind of guy, Donald, not Donny, is the kind of guy that I frankly don't want to be in a room with because he's gross, but he somehow thinks he's not. Yeah. And I think he sees that with women. It was like going back to the old Megyn Kelly thing, which how she went off the reservation, I don't know. Yeah. But he was talking about, blood pouring out of her eyes, blood pouring out of her, whatever. That's what he thinks of women. And particularly women of color, it just offends him that she would be beating him. And I think you're going to see him go more and more insane. He can't help it. He may fire his entire campaign team, which would just be awesome.
What astounds me is when I talk to people about the threats to democracy, and they're evident, and as any authoritarian, he talks about it. And I say, if he gets elected, we may never have a real free election anymore. And they go, oh, you're crazy. I said, well, what about January 6th? What about trying to steal 11,000 votes in Georgia? And this time it'll have all the people in place. Why can't people seem to accept that is not only a possibility, but a high probability? It's moving in. You see it in Technicolor.
It's a really good question. I think there's two kind of reasons. Number one, we've always just assumed the guardrails hold, and January 6th they held, right? It was messy, but they held, even though it was like, if you've ever seen a guardrail on the highway that took a car, like it was mangled.
It's a great analogy. Right.
It can't take another impact. It can take one, not two. But here's the other thing. I think we're not creative enough in thinking about what's really going to happen. So And this is a big concern I have, and I need to actually discuss this more because I think it's a big, serious concern. It's not going to be on January 6th this time. It's not going to be at the U.S. Capitol this time. Because at the time, after the last election, last presidential election, they were inventing the plane on the go. They were building the plane while they were flying it. Mm-hmm. And kind of everything culminated in this desperation on the 6th. What they're going to do now is they're going to do it at the state level. So let's take...
there are 70 MAGA election officials in counties that if they don't certify the county, you can't certify the state. I see it. I see exactly where you're going.
And that's the thing is, what do you get? So now you have to have a court challenge, and you have to assume the courts have been pretty good. You have to assume the courts are going to take your side on a claim, but now all of a sudden you're running the clock. So now it's like mid-December, late December. And then what happens if, let's say Arizona goes for Kamala, but Arizona has a Republican legislature and they just simply refuse to certify her. Or they say, nah, we're gonna certify Donald Trump because technically, and this was the concern on January 6th, according to the Constitution, there is a case that can be made, and a decent case, that actually the state legislature can send whoever they want to the Electoral College, even against the wishes of their people. Now, I would hope they would have riots, basically proverbial riots on their hand in the state, but they could do that. And that's where the real risk is. And we're not thinking about that enough because how do you handle that? And that's where the Democrats and frankly, democracy loving people need to have a strategy for pushing back on this, not if, but when it happens.
So any state legislature has the ability to just say, based on, we have the right to do it, we are not going to certify, we're certifying the other candidate.
Yeah. And this was the whole thing. This was the whole Eastman kind of memo with the alternate slate of electors is to what they wanted to do was have Mike Pence reject, let's say, Pennsylvania. And then it goes back to Pennsylvania, or probably a better would have been a state with a Republican legislature, and they could say, okay, there was enough fraud or concerns, we're just going to send this alternate slate of electors. And at that point, because keep in mind, presidential elections are not really federal elections, they're elections by 50 states. At that point, what does the federal court do? Maybe they can intervene, hopefully they can intervene, but that's not a guarantee. And especially with this Supreme Court.
This Supreme Court does not give me warm and fuzzy feelings of doing the right thing.
No, and especially after they said a president has unlimited immunity. It made it clear that they will take the side of Donald Trump, I think, in this case.
I was stunned at that. I was really, it just defies. Once again, these are people who are parents and children, and obviously they have their ideological views, but this is something that if you just are a basic fan of democracy, fan of who we are, fan of what's been going on for 250 years, you understand you're steering the car off the road. It really surprised me in a very depressing way.
It did me too. And you think about Kavanaugh, I think it was Kavanaugh that made the comment, like, we're coming up with a ruling for the ages. Like, when did conservative justices believe that you ruled for the ages? They didn't. It was supposed to be, let's deal with the exact issue in front of us. And if that creates precedent, fine. But that's not our intention. Instead, what the Supreme Court said is a president has immunity, quote, to the outer limits, whatever the hell that means, to the outer limits of his official capacity. And they didn't define official capacity. It was Amy Coney Barrett that said, alternate slate of electors, just to be clear, is not official capacity. But that wasn't in the main opinion. And so what you're saying that now when this January 6th case does go forward, almost everything that Judge Chutkan decides should stay in the case, in theory, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the practicality of it, but in theory could be litigated up to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court gave no idea of what is official or unofficial. Is a president calling Brad Raffensperger official or unofficial? Yeah. Well, the Supreme Court didn't say. So this is a legal mess, and it was the worst. I mean, this is as bad as, some of the worst cases you learn about in school.
So how do we get you back into politics?
I don't know, man. It's crazy. Look, for me, I'm enjoying what I'm doing now. I do have a little bit of the fire to get back in at some point. The question is like, where do I fit? Like, where do I belong? From a location, I never want to go back to the House. I've done enough there.
Yeah.
But party-wise, and this is a big question for Democrats is, are you going to openly accept conservative to moderate Democrats again? If you do that, by the way,
you'll win every general election. You'll
never lose again.
You never lose. The problem becomes, as you know, is the primaries. That is just both on the left and the right side. Somebody who would win a general election loses a primary because you have the extreme 20% of the party that votes.
Yeah. I'll tell you, though, what I've seen is the Democrats are better at this than Republicans. For instance, Colin Allred, I live in Texas now, is running. He's a pretty moderate Democrat. They could have put up the most liberal Democrat against him. He actually, it's going to be a tough race against Ted Cruz, but I think he's got a shot because he's a moderate. He's running on the border, and that kind of stuff. You look at what they did in Utah with Evan McMullin. The Democrats did not put up a candidate and supported independent Evan McMullin. And obviously he lost, but it was a close race. Thinking strategically like that, Democrats will never lose again. So for me, it's like, where do I belong? Certainly the current GOP. I'm going to maintain the label Republican because I refuse to let them win. But the party is not a conservative party today. It's a party of fascism, and I don't belong there.
It's the opposite of conservative. Adam Kinzinger, it's a long road. Something tells me you're going to be back in an important position of power because we need you. Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, it was great being with you.
All right, we'll see you again soon, okay?
You bet.
Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.